But let's say you take a person training wrestling and they get into a position where they have the underhook here. And then the person gets up as they're pushing down and then bang, all of a sudden I've torn my pec off the bone. Okay? So the pec was torn off the bone in this position. I want to see the program of that wrestler or MMA athlete or whoever it is. I want to see what they were doing. Mm-hmm. 9 times out of 10, they were doing the exact same thing that most people do. Right. Which is they were selecting from named exercises, right? And because they wanted to be powerful, they probably selected exercises that they have noticed other powerful athletes performing. A power lifter is powerful.
Sure is.
I want to be powerful. I want to train like a power lifter. This is an equation that's consistently run.
Right.
So now you take that wrestler, okay, and you train them in powerlifting, or I'm being specific, but let's just powerlifting or any other name that. So you're benching, right? You're taking a bar which can only go so far. You're hitting it here. You're pushing. Your arm is bent at this degree, so you're pushing. And you've been doing this time after time, time after time. You're getting stronger.
Right.
You're getting more powerful doing this. But then your arm is put back here and in this position.
Right. Barbell doesn't go back that far.
The barbell doesn't go back that far. The last time you were back that far, I don't know when it is. I don't know if they were monitoring the ability for the humerus to move in the scapula in and of itself.
Right.
Because if you have if all you're doing is this, your whole shoulder capsule will start to wall itself off in order to allow that to be done over and over.
Right.
So I don't know if they have because maybe now the workspace, the ability for the arm bone to move in the shoulder socket is restricted.
Right.
So that workspace is restricted. Now, if you're going to put me back here, if the joint can't get you there, well, then the overlying muscles are going to stretch that much more. And
Something has to.
And now you have muscles that are compensating for the lack of shoulder independent motion, that are at a very elongated position, that you have not trained to in a long time because you probably didn't do any training at length to that tissue. If you did some training at length, now you got to ask yourself, at what speed, when the person went down, and what was the speed that they went back into that position? And then you say, okay, when were you training at that position at the speed that would be needed to train the system to understand how to respond to forces coming in at that speed? Okay, and now you say, Dre, this is stupid. It's so specific that it's impossible to do. It's not impossible to do because
just take some planning.
When I train wrestlers, I know the positions that they're going to be put into. As a matter of fact, the injury profile of a sport is supposed to dictate the training profile for that sport. If the injury profile does not alter the training profile for the sport,
what's the point of collecting that data?
What's the point of knowing?
Right.
Right. I've been to NBA teams a long time ago when I first started with them, and what's a prevalent injury? Same one you had, ankle sprains. I go, where in the program are you trying to prevent this from happening? And
balance.
There you go, balance. That was the original answer. Well, we get them to balance on a bosu with their eyes closed while reciting the alphabet backwards in Swahili, while they're throwing things and they're touching and they're doing all these things. So in other words, you have time set out in your training to display the ability for the ankle to course correct when doing random things.
Right.
Okay, but you're not training that because the ability to course correct is dependent on the tissues that the nervous system is calling upon in order to course correct.
You know what the basketball player is never doing? Staying still on one foot on the court.
For sure. By the way, what they're also not doing is they're not being challenged at neutral.
Right. Because
what happens is you go on that bosu and you're balancing and you're fighting to keep your ankle in neutral.
Right.
But that's not where the injury happened.
It happened at length.
It happened all the way outside of neutral.
Right.
And not only did it happen at length, it happened at length while 230 pounds of the athlete was crashing into that ankle.
More if somebody else fell into you and fell on you and everything else.
Now, you could say, well, you're never going to get an ankle that's going to be able to take 400 combined pounds of force. However, that's why we say injuries are not preventable. They're only, you are able to mitigate the damage.
Less damage happens.
And how does less damage happen? You increase the force absorption capacity where? In the exact tissue where the force will be felt.
Right.
I'm just going to get strong. Just getting strong in a billion other ways is not the way that you needed when that injury occurred. So what should that wrestler have been doing? That wrestler should have known, a wrestler, this is very common.
Right.
You're getting a whizzer. This position is very common. Shoulder in extension is very common. Abduction, external rotation is very common. This position is very common. Now,
and there are speeds that are very common.
And every one of those positions and every one of those speeds, an exercise can be developed to mimic that.
What's the name of it, though?
There is no name, and that's the problem.
Exactly.
The problem. So, if you're a layperson, I get it.
Right.
There's a lot.
Right.
But if you're a trainer, you have no excuses.
Right.
Right.
I want to go back to something you said about the wrestler example, because you insert any sport here at this point, really. But the wrestler, because he wanted to be powerful, chose another powerful person to replicate, which was the power lifter. But what he's really doing, if we can acknowledge, we talked about it earlier, that powerlifting is its own sport. It has its own rules. It has its own goals. The wrestler is choosing another sport to do in his downtime or training time. But notice that the powerlifter isn't wrestling in his downtime.
That's right.
Because that would be a huge waste of time.
Yep.
Because he does not need the demands that the wrestler has. He needs to just understand his sport. What am I trying to express? What are the displays of strength that I need to accomplish? What tissue behaviors do I need to train to accomplish getting from my point A to my point B? So wrestling doesn't fit into any of that.
Nope.
So why are athletes looking up to Olympic lifting and powerlifting as the best expression of power or speed or whatever else? No, those are just specific sports that are using power and using speed in their displays of strength or athleticism. But you don't, if you're a runner and you want to get more explosive, that doesn't mean explosive means Olympic lifting. No, that's just one expression of explosive power.
I would say that you could probably garner a lot of information from power lifters in the way they approach the programming, frequency as to how to develop.
Over it.
Yeah, another example is, in a soccer team they might say, or a hockey team they might say, we need more power, so they'll give them to the sprint coach. But I don't need them to make them a sprinter. It might be that the sprint coach has exercises that put the person in the parameter so that their tissue responds by getting faster.
Right.
But the coach's job of the hockey team is to take that concept, the conceptual framework as to how they approach, and then apply it not to the sprinter, but to the hockey player body,
right.
Which means the exercises are going to change.
Right.
They're not going to be the same. Now, if you do, you will get faster probably at hockey. This is not a one-to-one.
Right.
But eventually, there will be diminishing returns.
Right.
And that's the problem.
Is.
There always is.
And
the problem with the human body is that if you don't train, if you do anything, you're going to get better.
Right.
To a point.
So people get started on the wrong foot, not because exercising is bad, but they just start to believe, I could do anything, and any amount of sets, and any amount of reps, and any exercise that I see other people doing, and I seem to get better because of it.
Yep, because
that doesn't last long.
It doesn't last. And then the repercussions of that don't come direct. They come in the form of nagging injuries. They come in the form of re-injury. Right? They come in the form of, and people don't necessarily correlate that to being the problem.
Right.
But, there's people have been bench pressing for extensively since they were 40 years old, for 20 years.
Yep.
You were bench pressing for 20 years. You should bench press 17,000 pounds. How much do you bench press? And then when you actually get the answer, I bench press approximately the same amount that I used to bench press.
Right. With a shoulder that feels worse.
Okay, so you see what I'm saying? With the shoulder that hurts more. So something is drastically wrong.
Right.
And it might not be as obvious as it should be. That's what I got to before. Unfortunately, the problem really lies in the fact that most people just don't put forth the effort to understand how the body works well enough.
Right. It's a misunderstanding.
But I mean, if you're a jiu-jitsu player, you have to learn. Like you do. You need to learn about the body. You have to ask questions about what jiu-jitsu is that makes it a something that soccer is not. And the essence of that something needs to be trained in a progressive manner in order to increase the load-bearing capacities that are involved in jiu-jitsu.
Yep.
Right? You're not going to lose a jiu-jitsu match because you didn't deadlift enough.
Right.
It's so insulting to the sport or to the art of jiu-jitsu to say, you know what, if I only had, I've almost never
5
heard
more
of,
pounds on my deadlift.
I've never heard a player say, I could have got out of that rear naked choke if only I had Romanian deadlifted 20 more pounds.
Right.
I've never heard that.
Right.
Usually they say that I lost specific capacity in my ability to, let's say, keep hold of the arm in this position. And then I go, well, when do you train that? I don't. And then a lot of people say, well, then you have to train everything. Well, you don't have to train everything. You just have to have a more suitable outcome measure that represents the function of the entire system, i.e., what do your joints do? What are they capable of? In what directions are they capable of absorbing force and applying force? In what directions are they incapable of applying or absorbing forces? Take training and direct them at those ranges.